basically, Zionism starts in the late 1800s. This is when the first Zionist writers start. And it starts mostly by, or maybe exclusively, but definitely mostly by Eastern European Jews. And Zionism was a reaction, in my opinion, a very understandable reaction to the pogroms. Which, like, dude, if you ever want to not be able to sleep at night, go read about the history of the pogroms. It's the most disturbing thing in the world.
I'm not aware of it at all.
Okay, so basically, there would be over and over and over again, there were waves of what you would just describe as kind of state allowed, in some cases, state sanctioned, just waves of mass violence against Jewish people in Eastern Europe. And if you think like the, you know, like if you ever, like, if you're in the dark recesses of the internet and you see some like anti-Jewish conspiracy and you might kind of like roll your eyes at it and be like, this is pretty stupid. But the stuff back then, it was like a virus would come in and they would accuse the Jews of practicing black magic. And that's why everyone's getting sick from this virus. So, like, try arguing your way out of that one. You know what I mean? Like,
what year is this? What time period?
This is happening all throughout the 1600s, 1700s, and into the 1800s. There are waves of it over and over again. And it's like, I mean, I'm talking about where, like, they would just storm Jewish areas and, like, literally the stuff that'll give you nightmares. I mean, it's like just rip your baby apart in front of you, rape your wife, make you watch, and then beat you to death afterward. And this happened over and over and over again. And so the early Zionists were basically like, they were like, we can't live like this anymore. Like, we can't live with this just like waiting for the next pogrom to happen. So we're not doing this anymore. And what we need is a Jewish homeland. And that was kind of their conclusion. And you can totally see where that's a totally reasonable conclusion in the face of that type of violence. Now, there were lots of other Jews who disagreed with them. There were lots of Jews. In fact, at the time, the only opponents of Zionism were Jews because they were the only ones who knew about this plan anyway. It was only a small group of people. But they were kind of like, well, no, you're giving in to the same anti-Semitic narrative that we're trying to fight. Like, because they'd be saying things like, look, we are different and we need to remove ourselves from society. And they're like, no, that's what they're saying. We disagree with that. We just want to be, you know, members of the society we live in and we just want our, like, equal rights. But anyway, the Zionists took off. One of the things that's really interesting, if you read the early Zionist writings, they did not talk much about Arabs. This is something Darryl Cooper did a really good job of covering in his series, by the way. But they were not talking about Arabs. They very rarely mentioned them. It was like they kind of picked Israel because that was the place in their holy book. You know what I mean? And that was like the history of, oh, this is where we started in Israel. Like, those are our holy sites. But none of the early Zionists had been to Israel. Or Palestine at the time. They had never been to this area. They were just like, this is the one in our holy book, so, like, let's do it there. And they don't talk much about Arabs. When they do, they speak of them in pretty friendly terms. They liked the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a lot cooler to the Jews than the Russian Empire, where most of these Jews lived. And they liked them. The Ottoman Empire tended to let Jews practice their religion and work and stuff like that. And so their enemy was Europeans. That's in the early Zionist writing. The bad guy is the Europeans who keep oppressing us. And then they're like, look, like, let's, they basically started organizing to, like, let's get people to go move to Palestine and start a life there. And over the years, they started to gain some influence over, like, some really wealthy Jewish financiers to kind of like back this.
This is in what time period?
It starts in the late 1800s, and then it kind of gets going in the first, say, like 15 years of the 20th century. They start building a little bit of momentum. They start raising more money. More Jews start settling in Palestine, and things were relatively peaceful there for the beginning. There were incidents here and there, but, like, relatively speaking, the Jews who lived in Palestine, there were Arab Christians and Arab Muslims, and they lived there, and it wasn't like a disaster. And then things started getting much worse during and particularly after the First World War. So in the First World War, the Ottoman Empire goes to war with the British Empire. And there were others involved as well. But the Ottomans and the British Empire are fighting each other. And it's the First World War. There's never been anything like it before in human history. It's the biggest war at the time ever. and it was very in doubt who was going to win. I mean, like the German military was, I think, viewed as the toughest at the time. Certainly their subs were like way more advanced than the other countries in there. And Britain is pretty desperate at this point. So the British, they cut a deal with some of the Arab nations. So the Arabs are being ruled by the Ottoman Empire at this point. So the British convince them to rise up and fight against the Ottoman Empire. And then they say, if you do that, we'll grant you your independence when the war is over and we've won. But then at the same time, they also released the Balfour Declaration, which is, so this is in 1917. This is in the middle of World War I. And they write this Balfour Declaration to the Rothschilds, who were like a crazy rich, powerful banking family, and because they were Zionists. And so they write this letter, or they were pro the Zionist cause. And so he writes this letter that says, like, it pleases the king that there should be a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So, but he also said in the declaration that with respect to the rights of the non-Jewish people there. This is kind of vague, but it was kind of like the king basically saying, like, hey, Rothschilds, we could really use some money for this war. So here's like a declaration that like will support a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And then they also promised the French Syria when the war is over. So they basically were just promising anyone whatever they can if you help our war effort. And it's just like, we got to win this war. We'll figure it all out after that. So then after the war, there's all of these different groups who kind of feel entitled to it because they were promised. And so the British Empire, the Ottoman Empire collapses after the war. They lose. Then the British Empire takes control. And they take control from the end of World War I up until 1947. And so the land was, under the control of European empires for hundreds of years. But if you ask me, that's not really what counts. Like, what really counts is like who was living there.